Greetings, wanderer of the internet. You've stumbled upon excellence, and I'm thrilled about it. Do me a solid and hit subscribe so I can keep feeding your brain with quality content. Your future self will thank you. Enough talking, time for action. 5 years ago, everything began. By sheer coincidence, I stumbled into creating what would become a small settlement we eventually named Circumstances. It had no official recognition, no corporate charter, no municipal boundaries, but life grew there anyway. Today, nearly 350 people call it home. Back then, I considered myself fortunate. I had just finished unloading another trailer in Texas, filled with branded medical bandages that required sterilization before they could hit retail shelves. After confirming the delivery was cleared, I contacted dispatch. To my surprise, they instructed me to pick up another load that would let me return home 2 days ahead of schedule. Because I carried a license for transporting hazardous materials, I was among the few authorized to handle the job. The pickup point was only 30 minutes away, and I wasted no time. I fueled up en route, secured the cargo, and hit the highway once more. The drop-off location was barely an hour from my home, and by the time I checked in to confirm the load, I realized I was not only ahead of schedule, I was being paid double the usual rate. Rather than stick to the designated route, I cut across backcountry roads. The shortcut shaved miles and hours off my journey. Within 2 hours, I'd be home, already running nearly 6 hours ahead of the clock. At a quiet rural intersection, I spotted a weathered hand-painted sign, "For sale before county takes it." An arrow pointed to the right. Curious, I followed. 2 more makeshift signs led me to an old farmhouse belonging to an elderly couple, late 70s, maybe older, who greeted me at the yard. Their story spilled out quickly: rising land taxes, fixed income, and a love for their property they couldn't bear to abandon. The farm had been leased out to neighboring growers, but debt was forcing their hand. I called my father. Through our family trust, we bought the farm at fair market value and allowed the couple to remain in the house indefinitely at a nominal rent. Their gratitude was immense. They even promised that if I ever needed a favor, they would gladly return it. Soon after, my father subdivided 10 acres from the original 200 at the crossroads, prime real estate for a general store and fuel station, given that the nearest major town was an hour away. I suggested he look into acquiring the other corners of the intersection as well, and, remarkably, he managed to secure 10 acres on each side. In the process of drilling for water, he discovered an underground river capable of sustaining 50 people. That water source would later become the lifeline for our growing enterprise. By the time I wrapped up those arrangements, the dispatcher had another load for me. I accepted without hesitation, and still managed to return home at the usual time. 6 months passed. One Wednesday morning, I finished a run at 5 a.m., 12 hours ahead of schedule. I parked the truck and trailer in the company yard and dropped the keys at dispatch, eager to retrieve my freshly restored Ford pickup. I knew state and federal regulators would soon come after me for exceeding legal driving hours. 16 days on the road with minimal rest breaks tends to draw attention. But at that moment, all I wanted was home. The upside? My replacement driver earned 2 extra days off. My rig was already scheduled for inspection and would be back on the road by 9 a.m. Marcy, my wife, had taken the kids out earlier but was expecting me for dinner. She didn't know I'd be home 10 hours ahead of plan. That truck, my old Ford, had been my side project for months. Its engine had died long ago, so I stripped it down to the frame and body. The interior was still solid, but I wanted the exterior to look brand new. Before my last 2-week run, I'd left it at a paint shop for a complete restoration. The transformation was astonishing. The once faded red body now gleamed a deep black. Chrome bumpers replaced the old steel. Even the original Ford script on the tailgate was hand-painted in white, true to factory style. It was finally worthy of collector plates. Jameson's Auto had installed the rebuilt engine and left the keys with dispatch, knowing I'd retrieve it on my return. I couldn't wait to surprise Marcy. She didn't start work until 9, which gave me plenty of time to catch her before she left. Excitement carried me down familiar streets as the morning sun lit the houses in soft gold. 16 days away from my wife and our 2 daughters felt like forever. But as I turned onto our street, a detail stopped me cold. A car in our driveway, one that had no reason to be there. Recognition struck instantly. It belonged to the youngest son of our company's owner, a man I knew all too well. We shared the same cab on alternating schedules, 2 very different men living parallel lives on the road. And right then, standing in front of my own home, I knew something was very wrong. He had always been seen as the family outcast, the one who never quite fit in. Among truckers, his name was almost legendary, mostly for his arrogant attitude and loud mouth. I pulled my rig over to the shoulder of the road, keeping my eyes fixed on him. Why was he standing in front of my house? And more importantly, where was my wife's car? My chest felt like it was being ripped apart when I finally got my answer. Out of the front door stepped my wife, Marcy, with Jack Redding, the so-called black sheep, and our 2 little girls. In Jack's right hand was a familiar bag, the kind every trucker carried, filled with the bare essentials for life on the road. Apparently, the kids had missed the school bus, and the 2 of them had come to take care of it. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Through the camera lens, I captured Marcy and Jack, pausing behind the children, sharing a warm, intimate embrace before loading the girls into the car. It was obvious this wasn't some new fling. This had been going on for a while. Neither of them seemed remotely concerned about being seen. They acted like a picture-perfect family out in the open. As they drove past me, they didn't even glance my way. Marcy clearly didn't recognize my restored truck, and since I'd been on the road for so long, she probably hadn't even thought to look for me. I watched through the rearview mirror as they turned the corner and disappeared. Then I pulled into the driveway of our 3-bedroom home, bracing myself for whatever I might uncover inside. The children's rooms were exactly as they had always been. So was ours. Marcy's clothes hung neatly in the closet, right where they belonged. So did mine. Even the bed was made, which struck me as odd since the kids had missed the bus earlier. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing obvious. But if they'd spent the night together, there had to be some trace, some clue left behind. And if they hadn't, then why was Jack here at all? I searched every corner, but my gut told me there was more to find. Upstairs, the basement, everywhere I checked looked normal. The dishwasher was full of dirty dishes waiting to be run. Nothing unusual. Then I saw it, a faint glow of light seeping out from under the door to the unfinished 3rd floor. That stopped me cold. The 3rd floor was supposed to be sealed off. Years ago, we'd hung heavy curtains and closed it off, using it as a kind of storage attic. I hadn't set foot up there in years. My first thought was that Marcy had gone up there and simply forgotten to switch off the light. But curiosity got the better of me. I had to know. I climbed the stairs and pushed the door open. The sight stunned me. The unfinished floor was no longer unfinished. It had been completely transformed. Sunlight poured in through an uncovered curtain, something that had never happened when I lived there, because those curtains were always drawn. Back when we discussed remodeling this space, Marcy and I could never agree on what to do with it. That's why we never touched it. Now I knew the real reason. This wasn't just renovated. It was lived in. There was a fully furnished bedroom, larger than the one Marcy and I shared downstairs, complete with massive walk-in closets on either side of a master bathroom. A cozy sitting area sat off to the side, equipped with its own television and DVD player. On a small table were several movies, titles Marcy would never allow in our home, much less watch herself. I pressed play on the DVD remote. The video that came up shattered me. Marcy, with him. Across the coffee table was a handmade card in childish handwriting. "We love you, Uncle Jake. signed by my daughters. My worst fears hardened into reality. Not only was Jack sleeping with my wife, he was worming his way into my children's lives, trying to take my family away from me. The bed upstairs was unmade, clearly slept in. Scattered across the floor were new baby dolls I had never seen before, a sign she had left in a rush this morning. The closets told the rest of the story. One side held men's clothes far too large to be mine, clearly Jack's. The other side was full of women's clothes I recognized as Marcy's, including several sultry evening gowns she had never once worn for me. There was no longer any doubt. Marcy and Jack were lovers, and I was finally seeing the side of her she had hidden from me all these years, a side that made me realize I had never truly been her first choice. Did my children know? Were they part of this deception? I began documenting everything. With my phone, I filmed every detail of what I found. I picked up one of Jack's shirts, oversized on me, and snapped a picture of myself wearing it in the mirror as evidence. My eyes landed on a framed photo of him with his parents. I recorded that too, making sure every detail was captured. I noted every object, every clue, and then saved the video, because now the truth was undeniable. When the television flickered to life again, I rewound the disc and captured a still frame, the image of a man frozen on the screen. It was unmistakable. Jack Redding, my employer's son. This marked the second clip I had managed to save. At that moment, I knew I had all the evidence I would ever need. I descended into the basement, retrieved our 3-piece luggage set, and began stuffing my clothes into them. Once everything I needed was packed, I climbed back up to the 3rd floor to collect the disc holding the damning footage. That, too, went into one of the suitcases. When I finished, I carried the bags to the front door and left them there. I would return for them later. First, there were more pressing matters to handle. I called my father. I asked him how soon the new store could be opened. He told me construction was already underway, a 2-story building with an apartment upstairs that had 2 bedrooms. He was currently searching for a regional manager to oversee operations, and since the chain we were partnered with had decided to franchise us, things were moving quickly. It would take another 6 weeks to finish building, and about another month to get everything fully operational. That would be fine. I would live in the apartment and run the store myself. But first, I asked him to find me a good civil and divorce attorney. I promised to explain everything later in detail. Next, I phoned the farmer we had bought the old property from and asked if he might rent me a room until construction wrapped up. He agreed to let me stay, but when I tried to pay him, he refused outright. He insisted that he and his wife owed my family too much already and wouldn't take a single cent. I told him I would be arriving the following morning. By 10 o'clock, I was seated in my boss's office at the transportation center. I informed him that I was resigning, effective immediately. No notice. He stared at me, confused, and finally asked why. I hated having to tell him. I handed him the videotape first, showing the entire room as it appeared, then the still photos I had taken afterward. The last photograph stopped him cold. It was a framed portrait of him, his wife, and their son. "Heath, where did you get that?" Jace asked quietly. I explained that it was found on the unfinished 3rd floor of my home. The color drained from his face until it was pale as new snow. Then I played the next clip, his son Jack with a woman. Jace, a devout Christian, stared at the screen in horror. "My God," he breathed. "That's revolting." "The woman's name is Marcy," I said. "She's my wife. That's why I'm leaving." The footage had been recorded secretly in that private upstairs room, clearly with help from a 3rd person. "I don't know what else to do," I admitted. "Because of what your son and my wife have done, I have no choice. I have to quit driving if I'm going to stand a chance of getting custody of my daughters in the divorce." Without another word, Jace called in the accountant and ordered my final paycheck. He also instructed them to add a $1,000 bonus, his way of compensating me for what his son had done. Say nothing to anyone, he told me. Come back to my office once you've settled everything. Then, with an expression that was part anger, part grief, he asked, Are the children yours? Or his? They look like Marcy, I said, shaking my head. I believe they're mine. I don't think this affair has been going on long enough for that. We've heard whispers for some time, Jace admitted gravely. The only way to be certain is with a DNA test. You should demand that from your son, I said, my voice hollow. Please, I added, don't say a word to anyone else. I want Marcy to discover tonight that I already know everything. Heath, Jace said quietly, I want you to understand something. I don't condone what my son has done. When he returns in 2 weeks, he's finished. We've long suspected he was involved with a married woman, sneaking around behind her husband's back. We just didn't know it was you. I'm ashamed of him. I didn't even realize he'd moved into your home. He paused, looking pained. But with both of you working, he went on, I can see how it could go on so long without anyone finding out. Later, I would learn that Jace kept his word. Not only did he fire Jack, but he cut him out of the will entirely, furious that his son had dishonored the family name by destroying another man's marriage. Jace could not bear that betrayal, not toward one of his most trusted employees. After cashing the check, I emptied our joint bank accounts and paid off the last bill at Jameson's Auto. From there, I drove straight to my daughter's elementary school. I spoke with the school counselor first. After a long discussion, she called the girls out of class so I could talk to them. As she began to step away, I stopped her. It's probably best if you stay, I told her. I don't want anyone claiming I tried to influence my kids. She looked at me skeptically. Are you absolutely sure? Yes, I answered firmly, because my wife, Marcy, works as a state social worker. Shock flickered across her face. In that moment, I learned something else. For 3 years, their so-called Uncle Jake had been quietly renting the upstairs apartment. At first, he kept his distance, barely speaking to anyone. Over time, though, he blended into the family so naturally that Marcy introduced him as some distant cousin who had recently come back to town. No one had ever actually caught them together, but the sight of Mom downstairs with him every morning made it obvious enough. They were spending the nights together. Eventually, Mom insisted we start calling him Uncle. Linda still remembers that moment vividly. I couldn't stomach it. I told them flat out that he wasn't related to us in any way. The shock on my daughter's faces was immediate, like I'd just pulled the floor out from under them. I explained who Jack really was, the man their mother had been involved with for years behind my back, and why that was the reason we were getting divorced. Being a long-haul trucker, I told them I couldn't possibly get primary custody right away. They'd have to stay with their mother for now, but I promised I would fight for them once I secured a new job and had proof I could be there every day. The school counselor later confirmed everything I said was true. She even handed me her name and phone number, urging me to give it to my lawyer. Have them call me. I'll testify, she said. I've seen too many men lose everything because of someone else's lies. After kissing my daughters goodbye, I stood there, watching them walk back to class. Later, I stopped by a florist and asked for the deadliest-looking bouquet they had, something wilted, rotting. The request startled them, so I explained it was for a gag. Eventually, a woman working there went out to the dumpster and brought back some discarded flowers. Will these do? She asked. Perfect, I said. She wrapped them carefully, boxed them up. When I got home, I laid everything on the bed. The box of dead flowers, the card my daughter had sweetly signed for Uncle Jack, and her favorite doll, cut into pieces with her own sewing scissors. The tools I wanted to keep, I packed onto my truck bed. Suitcases followed. A tarp went over everything, lashed down tight. Those tools were worth more than most people realized. Not long after, my neighbor John Sexsmith, one of the only real friends I had left, walked over. He shook his head and said, Guess you didn't know about Marcy's second husband. The rest of us figured you did. Second husband? I asked. Common law, he explained. I told him I'd only learned the truth today. It had been going on for at least 3 years. We'd even worked at the same company. I'd quit that morning right after finding out, because fighting for custody meant proving I could be home for my girls every day. I told John that Marcy's lover, Jack, was the boss's youngest son. His father had found out about the affair the same moment I did, when I stormed in and quit without warning. We talked for a while, weighing my options. John offered to let me park my truck in his garage for the night. If I kept watch, he said, maybe I could figure out what to do next. By morning, we could slip away quietly before dawn. I thought about it, then nodded. It was the right call. That evening, I sat in hiding and watched the woman I'd spent 13 years with pull up to our house. Her car must have been in the shop because she was driving something else. She walked inside and headed straight for the bedroom to change out of her work clothes, then stopped cold. She saw the items laid out on the bed. At first, she smiled. She must have thought Jack had left her some kind of surprise. Through the binoculars, I watched her face light up as she picked up the card, my daughter's handwriting calling him Uncle Jake. She set it aside, still grinning. Then she noticed the doll. Her smile faltered as she held the broken pieces, realizing what it was. That doll had been special to her because she'd bought it for Jack. Confusion replaced her smile. Worry crept in. She brushed aside the box of flowers, opened it, and recoiled at the stench of rotting roses. For a second, I thought she might vomit. "Sam!" she gasped. That was when I knew. She hadn't realized I'd found out. The panic on her face wasn't about me. She thought this was Jack's way of ending things. Moments later, the school bus pulled up. My daughters climbed down and ran to the front door. Lauren texted me, "We're calling you, but don't speak. Just listen to what we tell Mom. We think she needs to hear the truth, just like you taught us." I told John what was about to happen. Together, we watched. When I put the call on speaker, I warned them, "We'll have to stay quiet. Both of us need to hear this." The girls immediately left and went to their mother's bedroom. She was still reeling, unable to process what I had done, or the message I had left her. Nothing about it seemed to register in her mind yet. After greeting her as though nothing unusual had happened, my daughters began to recount what they'd just experienced. "Dad called us out of class today," Linda began, her voice trembling slightly. "He said he needed to talk to us alone." From the way she looked at her mother, I could tell she had captured her full attention. "They took us to the counselor's office," Linda continued, "and we didn't know why he was there. You told us he'd be home around 6, remember?" "That's when he asked Miss Connor to stay with us," Lauren added. "The very first thing he wanted to know was who Uncle Jack was and how long he's been part of our family. I told him Jack was a distant cousin of yours who had just moved back into the neighborhood," Linda said. At that moment, I saw a flicker of fear cross Marcy's face. She realized exactly who had left the message on the bed. "Dad didn't know you'd finished the 3rd floor while he was away on the road," Lauren went on. "You told us it was a surprise for him." "We thought it was," Linda chimed in, "and we promised to keep it secret, remember? We thought it would make him happy." "But he said he didn't even know it was done until today," Lauren added quietly. Marcy's youngest, Marcy Jr., suddenly spoke up through tears. "Mom, you always told us never to lie, but I guess lying to everyone in the family is okay if it's you doing it." Her sobs grew heavier. "Dad didn't know Uncle Jack had been renting the 3rd floor for over 3 years," Linda said firmly. "We explained how, whenever he was away, you never slept in the bed you shared with him. We knew because it was always untouched when we left for school." At that, Marcy went pale. Her own daughters had exposed her, not with accusations, but with small truths so undeniable that they tore through her defenses. The unmade bed, a simple detail, had betrayed her. "We told Dad we never caught you with Jack," Lauren admitted, But we did tell him we often saw you coming down from the third floor in the mornings, right after he left. Dad said he's going to divorce you, Linda said flatly. He told us Jack isn't family at all. He's your lover, and you've been hiding him from everyone. Lauren's voice trembled as she continued. Dad said you and Jack used him, his job, his money, all for yourselves. He said everything you've built with him is a lie. Linda nodded. He said we'd have to stay with you for now, until he finds new work. He quit his job today so he can fight for custody of us. Miss Connor later explained why. A court would never award custody to a long-haul truck driver. Quitting was his only chance. After he left, we were sent back to class, but none of us could focus. Marcy sat on the edge of the bed, crying so hard she could barely hold herself up. She knew every word they spoke was true. Heath was preparing for the inevitable legal fight, and as a social worker, Marcy understood exactly how the court would view her. We broke down completely, Linda confessed. The counselor pulled us out of class for the rest of the day to talk things through. During that talk, they learned things no child should have to learn. Sleeping with someone else while you're married? That's adultery, Mom, Lauren whispered. Miss Connor said it's the biggest betrayal a spouse can commit. Linda's tone hardened. She wondered why you thought you could get away with living two lives, like you had two husbands. Marcy muttered bitterly to herself. I don't have two husbands. I have Heath, and someone I live with. In her mind, she tried to soften it, tried to frame it in a way that others might accept. But deep down, she knew Heath would never see it that way. Pride alone left him no choice. He would file for divorce. To him, she was nothing more than a fool's trap he'd fallen into, a man who'd given everything while being used. Linda spoke again. Lauren and I talked. We think you must hate Dad, and us too. That's the only reason you could do this, and keep doing it. Miss Connor said no one who truly loved Dad could ever treat him this way, Linda added. Marcy's sobs grew violent. Her daughter's words sliced into her like knives. She had never expected to be confronted, certainly not by her own children. And now, they were forced to grow up in a single day. Before we got on the bus, Linda continued, Miss Connor asked if we were okay. She said she'd take us home herself if we weren't. I told her we'd be fine, Linda said softly. It would give us time to talk. She also said she'd testify if the court needed her to, Lauren added. She said she can't ignore what she heard. She's seen too many lives ruined by lies like these. On the bus ride home, the girls whispered among themselves, making decisions they should never have had to face. By the time they finished telling their story, Marcy had lost all composure. She buried her face in her hands and wept. Mom, we're only 12, Lauren began, her voice trembling with defiance. But it won't be long before we're old enough to decide for ourselves who we want to live with. Miss Connor told us that when we turn 13, the choice will be ours. And we've already decided. We're going to live with Dad. She straightened her shoulders, almost daring her mother to object. We're calling Grandma. She'll come pick us up, and we can stay with her and Grandpa until Dad figures everything out. Then you and Jack can have this entire house to yourselves. Lauren glanced at her sister and gestured toward the door. Come on, let's call Grandma and start packing our stuff. Before leaving, Linda turned back, her expression cold and sharp. One more thing, Mom. Are you pushing us to be close to Uncle Jake just so we'll be okay with him becoming your new husband behind Dad's back? Because that's what it feels like to us. The words cut deeper than any scream. Marcy froze. Her lips quivered, and tears spilled down her cheeks as both girls headed for the stairs. They didn't wait for her answer. They didn't need one. The truth was already written on her face. Her daughters had inherited their father's ability to see through lies, to cut straight to the core of any situation. Their logic was simple, brutal, and undeniable. At that moment, I sent Marcy a text. What you found on the bed? That was me. Tell your so-called husband I'll be taking him to court for joint custody. You and the kids. Through binoculars, I watched the realization wash over her. She finally understood what would happen once I exposed everything. Her relationship, the lies, the carefully constructed facade. When this went to court, she wouldn't just lose custody, she'd lose everything. There was no path to redemption now, no happy ending left to salvage. If Heath filed the lawsuit, and he would, Jack's reputation would be dragged through the mud along with hers. The fallout would be catastrophic. John and I counted the minutes. Less than 5 passed before her parents' car screeched into the driveway. The shouting started the second they stepped out. John cracked open the front door, listening. Their voices weren't just raised, they were practically screams. Her mother's fury hit first. She scolded Marcy as she ushered her granddaughters out the door, shielding them like they were escaping a burning building. But it was her father's voice, low, shaking with restrained rage, that delivered the final blow. So, you cut Heath out of your life for Jack. Fine. But don't pretend this is about love. Once things fall apart with him, and they will, you'll be sniffing around for another man to take his place. Always chasing the next thrill. He spat on the ground, disgust dripping from every word. Jack's already proven he doesn't respect you. He shares you. And you've shown us all that one man will never be enough. Marcy collapsed under the weight of his words. Her sobbing turned uncontrollable, her face buried in her hands. Her mother's voice cracked as she gathered the girls. We'll call child services tomorrow. This needs to be handled the right way. After all, it was our granddaughters who reached out, who told us why they couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't be prouder of them. Somebody raised them right. And sadly, Marcy, it wasn't you. The door slammed behind them. Silence settled, broken only by Marcy's muffled crying in the other room. John walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out 2 beers. He handed me one with a grim nod. Your girls handled this better than any of us, Heath. You should be proud. I leaned against the counter, letting his words sink in. When the crew was here renovating, Marcy told me she was short on money and wanted to rent out the top floor. She said everything was paid off, the house, the land. I never questioned it. John frowned. So, the rental income? There was none, I muttered. Jack must have been funding it out of his trust. She's been lying since day one. They planned this together. I pulled out my phone and found Marcy's name. Tell me when she's back in the bedroom, I whispered to John. A minute later, he checked. She's lying down. Calm down a little. I hit send. The message was short, venomous. Hey, slut. Jace Redding and I want to know, with everything going on between you and his son, are Linda and Lauren mine or Jack's? Jace is filing to find out. John's eyes widened as Marcy's scream echoed through the house. She hurled her phone at the wall, then collapsed face down on the bed, sobbing like someone who'd just watched her life burn to ash. John stepped back into the kitchen, half in shock, half grinning in disbelief. What the hell did you text her? I shrugged. Exactly what I told you. Jace has suspected for years that his son was seeing a married woman, and that her husband had no idea. I asked the only question that matters. John's face went pale. He knew Jace's reputation. The man would take this to the Supreme Court if he had to. Half an hour later, I checked again. Marcy had moved to the couch, dazed and hollow. I sent her one last message. This time, it wasn't words. A 5-minute video clip. Her, on her knees. The man's face unmistakable. Jack. And a single caption. Who do you think filmed this? I waited a while before sending a message saying I'd taken the CD. Maybe once I watched it, the truth would finally make sense. John's reply came quickly. Marcy's lost control again. He added, I don't need to know what words were exchanged, but she's vomited all over the living room carpet. By 5 in the morning, I'd already left the house. I forwarded everything I'd written the night before, to friends, to family, even to the people I'd call enemies. Along with it, I sent a single line. This is what I showed Jace Redding when he asked why I had no choice but to leave. The second video was filmed on the same floor where the bedroom was, and though this time someone else had helped record it. The neighbors were already whispering, openly claiming that Jack Redding was Marcy's second husband. Marcy herself had apparently told them that I'd given my blessing to this arrangement. That was a lie. I only uncovered the truth yesterday, and now I'm preparing to file for divorce and to sue Jack Redding on more than one count. It was a brutal way for the day to begin. I stopped at a quiet truck stop just outside town, parked where I could see my rig through the diner window, and ordered the kind of breakfast truckers swear by. "Sorry, Heath," Marcy, Maureen's younger sister, said softly as she approached my table. "No man deserves what happened to you. Mind if I sit?" I nodded and gestured to the seat across from me. She slid in without waiting for more encouragement. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Mom and Dad told me last night," Maureen said quietly. "The girls told them everything after they got home. We were all stunned." She hesitated, then added, "If you change your number, please tell us, so we don't accidentally give it to Marcy." "I'm keeping it," I answered. "I was planning to quit after 2 months anyway. The girls are growing up fast. I wanted evenings free when their teenage years start kicking in." Maureen shook her head in disbelief. "What on earth was my sister thinking? There's no way you'd ever agree to her having a second husband." "I don't think we'll ever know," I admitted. "Maybe it started as a harmless friendship and crossed the line over time. Whatever the case, she didn't fight it. She seemed to enjoy it. From what I've heard, it lasted a lot longer than those 3 years people keep talking about." Maureen frowned. "What do you mean?" "When I explained to Jace Redding why I was leaving," I said, "he mentioned rumors. He'd heard that his youngest son had been involved with a married woman for years." Her eyes widened. "Linda and Lauren, do they even belong to you? Or to Jack?" "Who else knows?" she asked almost immediately. I opened Marcy's messages and handed her the phone, letting her read what I'd sent her last night, and then what I'd sent this morning. By the time Maureen finished, she had tears streaking her face. She'd suspected it was bad. The video confirmed it was worse, and judging by what the footage showed, someone else had been part of their relationship too. "By the end of the day, everyone will know," I said quietly. "Jace will end up being dragged into the spotlight while people search for answers." The truth was brutal. Either both girls were mine, both belonged to Jack, or neither of us was their biological father. Lately, I found myself obsessing over one question. Was the person who filmed the videos a man or a woman? Maureen must have noticed the tears welling in my eyes. She stood, walked around the table, and took my hand. We stayed silent until the waitress returned to take our order. Only when the food arrived did I release her hand to eat. Heath and Marcy had married young, barely 19. She'd been the youngest of her bridesmaids, yet she'd loved him deeply, loved him even now, despite everything. To her, he'd always been handsome. Heath had driven long-haul trucks so Marcy could finish college. When she graduated, she received multiple offers for state jobs. She chose the one closest to her hometown. Now it was clear why. Jack, her first love, was there. Their parents had never approved of him, but Marcy had wanted to be near him all the same. Maureen watched Heath quietly. She could tell he still hadn't processed the full weight of what had happened. Whenever Heath was home, Maureen spent every spare moment with him and the kids. He was an honest man, one who always treated her as an equal. Whenever she faced trouble, Heath was the one she turned to. He taught her to step back and see problems from every angle until they didn't seem so overwhelming. It had been easy to love him, so easy, in fact, that no man she'd met since could ever measure up to the standard he unknowingly set. Her parents wanted her to marry someday, but Maureen could never tell them the truth. She'd loved Heath for as long as she could remember, and she always would. He was a loyal man, one who had never let his eyes wander toward another woman. All she needed now was a way to keep Heath tied to her life. When the right moment came, she would act and prove beyond doubt that he had chosen the wrong sister to marry. "Have you decided where you're going to live yet, Heath?" Maureen asked. "Linda and Lauren, they've been begging Mom and Dad to let them stay there," she went on. "They're upset, angry, but still so proud of you. They've already told Mom and Dad they'll tell the court themselves. They want to live with you. Mom and Dad have tried to explain that what you're doing is for the best in the long run. If you want, I can bring them to visit you on weekends." I pulled out my notebook and scribbled down the address to the farm. "Dad and I have started work on a bar and a small store next to it," I explained. "For now, I'll be staying with the farm's tenant until the apartment we're building is ready. I'll have to check in with them first before I can give a definite answer." "It's going to be a 2-bedroom place," I added. "Why there?" Maureen asked. "We've got about 10 acres on either side of the crossroads," I told her. "We're planning to break it into 3/4-acre lots once the infrastructure is up. And if it comes to it, we can use another section of the farm. There's nothing else out here, so the store should draw people in. It'll be useful to everyone nearby." "Then how did you even find it?" "There's nothing there on Google Maps," she said, incredulous. "I drove through the back roads to save time," I replied. "Traffic was bad on the highway. I found a 4-way stop, followed the flow of cars, and realized there was enough traffic to support a business." When we finished our meal, I grabbed the ticket. Maureen leaned over and kissed my cheek, like she always did. It never failed to make me smile. "Don't forget about Heath," she said softly. "A lot of us have always loved you just for being yourself." On the drive afterward, I called Dad and filled him in. He promised to get me the best divorce lawyer he could find. The trip to the site was 75 miles. I kept count of every mile on the odometer. By the time I arrived, it was a little past 8:30. Seeing the site brought a grin to my face. Dad had big plans here. There would be 8 pumps for regular cars and light trucks, and 2 more on the far end for semis. The trenches for the tanks were already dug, lined with blocks for the leak control system in case of failure. The concrete foundation for the steel supports was underway. I stepped into the construction trailer and looked over Dad's plans. It resembled the usual layout he used, except this one had a 24-foot apartment built on top. That detail alone made me smile. He clearly believed this place had potential. 2 hours later, I headed toward the farm. Bill Robinson came out to greet me when I pulled in. He immediately admired my old Ford truck, the kind built back when weight and solid steel mattered more than speed. His wife, whom he simply called Mrs., was about to serve lunch and insisted I stay. She prepared a hearty farmer's meal, and I think she was pleased by how much I ate. Afterward, I helped tidy up. She scraped leftovers into containers while I washed the dishes. At some point, she noticed I wasn't wearing my wedding ring anymore. By the time the last plate was dried and put away, a fresh pot of coffee was already brewing. For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything that had happened over the past couple of days. Bill said the girls and their aunt were welcome there any time. "Be good to have young ones running around again," he said, "and someone else to cook for on the grill." I texted Maureen, "Every Friday night until Sunday, you can come here." Her reply came quickly, "It's a date." Thursday afternoon, I reviewed the disc on my laptop. Not a single face showed up throughout the entire recording. Using my phone as a Wi-Fi hotspot, I forwarded everything to Dad: the files, Ms. Connor's address, her phone number. I asked him to contact Jace Redding to track down Jack's whereabouts and serve him as soon as possible. Marcy could be served directly at the city's social services office. I even attached a video file pulled from the disc. Out of spite, I sent Marcy a text. I watched the whole video. Nothing special. The others were better. Maureen, being a tax major, had spare time. This was her slow season. As soon as the girls were out of school, she hit the road with them. She couldn't stop laughing as they texted their dad every 10 or 15 minutes. The 75 miles flew by. When they reached the construction site, they sent one last message. We're here." Driving down the dusty road, they spotted him standing at the end of the driveway, waiting. Linda and Lauren bolted out of Maureen's car and flung themselves into my arms. Bill and his wife came over to say hello. That's when I finally learned her real name, Betty. The girls were thrilled with the room Betty had prepared for them. Bill guided everyone to their rooms while Betty finished preparing an enormous dinner. Once the meal was over, I stayed behind to clean up. Betty stood by, quietly watching as my daughters and I scrubbed the dishes so she could later put them away. Meanwhile, Bill entertained the girls, describing the adventures waiting for them outside, the massive swings swaying under the oak trees, the clear swimming pond, and the little bicycles they could learn to ride, if I gave my permission. I couldn't help but worry about how my kids would adjust, but Bill and Betty seemed to have every detail carefully planned. When the children were finally asleep, Maureen and I sat down to talk. "Heath," she said softly, "the past few days have been pure chaos. Everything's coming out." That's when she revealed the truth. Jack had been someone she'd secretly dated back when we were young. Their connection stretched back further than I had ever imagined. "That explains so much," I murmured, strangely relieved. I had always been the safe and predictable choice, while Jack carried a wild streak Maureen quietly adored. What hurt most was knowing Jack had used that side of himself to manipulate her, only to abandon Marcy with responsibilities she didn't deserve. "Mom and Dad have already spoken to Child Services," Maureen continued. "If you give written permission, they can keep the kids until you're settled somewhere." The social workers had even spoken privately with the children, later confirming what I already feared. Because of Marcy's unstable lifestyle, there was no way she could be approved as a foster parent. Maureen looked at me, noticing the tears streaming down my face. The weight of everything finally hit me. I begged her to leave and let me handle it alone, but she refused and stayed by my side. Elsewhere, Marcy sat at the kitchen table, replaying the whirlwind of the past 2 days in her mind. Thursday had passed in relative quiet, but today was different. Jace Redding had shown up at her workplace, papers in hand. He was taking her to court. He wanted a DNA test to prove whether the twins were biologically his. Marcy couldn't even recall the details of that distant time. So many years had passed since the girls were conceived. Heath had warned her this fight was coming, but she dismissed it as his anger talking. What truly stunned her was the message Heath had sent out to their friends and family. Until today, Marcy had never considered Jack to be her second husband, but her lawyer clarified the shocking truth. By law, they were married through common law rights. From the moment Jack had moved in, the clock had started ticking. After a year of cohabitation, they shared all the rights of a legally married couple. This meant Heath's lawsuit against Jack wasn't baseless. In fact, he stood a strong chance of winning. The only real question now was how much the court would award him. The lawyer explained that Heath would likely be favored in court. He had been wronged for years, while Jack had made no meaningful contributions to the household. Had Marcy collected rent and documented it through bank statements, the outcome might have been different. But without evidence, the court viewed Jack as nothing more than a dependent, a man supported entirely by Marcy. The real blow came later, when her supervisor called her into the office. On Thursday evening, at the request of Mr. and Mrs. Rubenstein, whom everyone affectionately called Mr. and Mrs. Claus, Marcy had met with them to discuss custody arrangements. They had explained what had unfolded the previous night and sought guidance from the state. After speaking with the children, Marcy informed the grandparents that if they obtained written permission from the father, they could serve as temporary guardians until the case was resolved. Her supervisor sighed heavily. "Marcy, I can't transfer you just yet, but as soon as there's an opening, I will. I can't fire you, but your credibility in this area is gone. No one trusts your judgment anymore. From here on out, You'll be assigned to office work only. Your field cases will be given to someone else." The disappointment in her supervisor's tone cut deep. Marcy knew she had no one to blame but herself. It had been her decision, and hers alone, to keep pursuing Jack despite the consequences. And now the reality was clear. Every choice carries a price. Saturday brought new energy to the house. Linda and Lauren were eager to explore, their eyes sparkling with excitement. It was a joy watching Bill explain the rules about the little bicycles the girls had been eyeing so curiously. For 2 straight hours they practiced, laughing and wobbling their way forward. Finally, Bill called it quits. "That's enough for today. You'll be sore tomorrow," he chuckled, noticing how flushed and sweaty they were. "Go cool off in the pond." Betty and Maureen joined us, smiling as the children ran toward the water, their laughter echoing through the trees. 4 of the girls were asked to help with part of the dinner preparations that evening. Because none of them had done it before, I went to check on their progress. I found them at the kitchen table, slicing onions for 2 of the dishes and carefully peeling hot boiled potatoes meant for the salad. Outside, Bill was firing up the grill, readying the steaks he'd taken out of the freezer earlier. I gave him a hand wherever I could. Later, we sat around the picnic table outdoors, enjoying juicy steaks, creamy potato salad, and a side of baked beans. What struck me most about that day was how quiet it felt, without any screens. No television, no phones. The twins seemed to be discovering a simpler kind of joy. By evening, the girls were so worn out they decided to turn in early. The rest of us stayed up, sipping beer and playing cards until darkness settled in. Sunday afternoon came too quickly, and it was time for them to leave. Before they went, Maureen received a handwritten letter, signed by both Billy and Betty, granting the permissions they needed. The next morning, bright and early, Klaus Rubenstein called me. He thanked me for ensuring the letter reached him without delay. He personally delivered it to the office, where the supervisor made copies and issued official documentation proving Klaus and his wife were now the rightful guardians of their granddaughter. That led to long conversations about his daughter's past with Jack, stories I'd never known, details I hadn't expected. By Friday morning, Jake Redding was down in Austin, Texas, collecting a shipment of sterilized medical supplies when he was served the papers. Almost simultaneously, as soon as the social services office opened that day, Marcy was served as well. Not long after, I got a text from Maureen. She wanted me to measure my waist. I asked why. "Because we're going swimming in the pond with the kids," she replied. I answered, 34. That evening, while walking, I felt my phone buzz with another notification. This time it was from Marcy. "You calm enough to talk yet?" I texted back, "There's nothing left to say about your parents. Maureen already told me everything, from the secret meetings with him to everything since. I just keep asking myself, if he was always the love of your life, why marry me at all?" She never responded. When Maureen finally arrived with the kids, it was hard to tell who was happier, them or us. She looked radiant, her smile infectious, and the girls' excitement lit up the entire moment. As soon as they embraced me, they whispered a question I answered with, "Yes, if everyone agrees." They ran off toward Bill and Betty to greet them, and before I knew it, Maureen leaned in and kissed me, deep and sudden. It caught me completely off guard. I told her she should listen to whatever the girls had to say, and we walked toward them hand in hand. "Can we call you grandparents?" Lauren asked quietly. "And me too," added Linda. Bill and Betty agreed instantly, but what moved us most were Betty's tears. Only later did we learn the reason. She had never been able to have children of her own. Hearing those words from my daughters was something she'd thought she would never experience. After dinner, I pulled Maureen aside. I confirmed that both Marcy and Jack Redding had been officially served, then showed her the last message I'd received from Marcy, and my reply. "My sister can never explain herself," Maureen said softly. "Because if she tried, she'd have to admit the truth about her own life. Enough about your sister, I told her. When are you going to let someone love you the way you deserve? Don't be shocked, she said, smiling faintly. I already found him. My problem is convincing him to realize it. Bill and I rose early the next morning and shared coffee on the porch. Heath, he said quietly, Betty's my second wife. My first was her sister, and she did to me what Marcy did to you. I looked at him carefully. Why are you telling me this? Because bitterness will blind you to what's right in front of you. Maureen's been there for you since the start. When you're ready, ask yourself why. That was when it finally hit me. Maureen wasn't just a friend. Could she want more than that? Why do you ask? Bill, how did you even realize Betty was interested in you? I said. He chuckled. She hit me over the head with a cast-iron skillet. I raised an eyebrow. She caught a local girl trying to flirt with me, he added, still laughing. That's when I knew. Since Bill and Betty couldn't have children of their own, they had fostered several kids over the years. Our talk was cut short when voices carried over from the other side of the yard. The rest of the family was gathering. The twins had been tearing around on motorcycles for hours, and now it was time to cool off with a swim. We all headed toward the water. Bill and Betty set up lounge chairs so we could watch a friendly beach ball match. Later, we went back to the house to clean up for dinner. The moment we stepped inside, Betty's sharp eyes caught on immediately. Looks like things are falling into place the way you hinted, she teased, smiling broadly. Not her, I corrected. I already told Heath about your infamous skillet story, Bill grinned. The twins overheard and begged him to retell the tale of how he and Betty ended up together. After dinner, the twins were so worn out from the fresh air and running around that they went straight to bed. I sat on the porch swing in the fading evening light when Maureen joined me. She leaned against my shoulder, and I wrapped an arm around her. Mom figured it out the moment I brought the twins home last week, she said quietly. She thought I looked happier than I've been in years. Guess my poker face isn't as good as I thought. How did she take it? I asked softly. I imagine she must have been worried about, well, everything. She asked if anything had actually happened between us, Maureen admitted. I told her no. Then she asked how long I'd been in love with you. And? Since the summer you got married, she whispered. Wow, I said, stunned. All that time, and I never saw it. I braced myself for a lecture, Maureen went on. But instead she said that if it worked out, she'd convince Dad to accept it. Then she told me something I didn't know, that her own sister once threw Dad out. She thanks her for that every single day. Sunday afternoon, as I kissed Maureen goodbye, Lauren confided something to Linda. Linda looked shocked. Aunt Maureen has loved Dad for years, Lauren explained. It took what Mom did to Dad for him to finally realize it. If Maureen gets her way, they'll marry as soon as the divorce is final. As they drove off, I couldn't help but wonder, how did my daughter even know all of that? Heath, Bill said, come with me for a minute. I've got an idea to run by you. We walked off the property, over a small bridge that crossed a creek, and onto the far side of the land. There was a beautiful stretch of ground that used to belong to the original estate. This would make the perfect spot for a house, don't you think? Bill asked. Lauren and Linda could come out here any time, ride bikes, maybe even keep horses. Who came up with this? I asked. Betty and Maureen, he said with a laugh. They're planning to pitch it to you next week. Monday morning, Klaus called with bad news. A court order had been issued for Jace Redding to obtain blood samples from Lauren and Linda. I had to explain everything I knew. He was blindsided. Until that moment, he believed Marcy had simply been in a long-term relationship with him for the past 3 years. Learning there was a paternity issue devastated him. He stormed into social services and, in front of everyone, told his daughter she was dead to him. Later, I spoke with my mother-in-law. She said Miss Connor had already provided a notarized statement to my attorney. Jack was expected back in town on Wednesday. "Do you think you should stick around to see what unfolds?" she asked. "You're welcome to stay here." I told her I'd give it some thought. That evening, I rang up John Sexsmith and asked if I could quietly crash at his place on Tuesday night. He agreed without hesitation, said he had something important to tell me anyway. Bill offered me his car, saying it'd be better if nobody recognized what I was driving. I told him I'd only take it on the condition that he borrow my truck and treat his wife to a day out. He laughed and said, "Not bad for a young guy, pretty sharp." By the time I slipped out into town, dusk had already settled over the streets. I phoned John to make sure he was home before pulling into his driveway. Word around was that since I'd left, someone else had been showing up at Marcy's place. That night he was there again, standing outside her house. John handed me his binoculars, and the moment I saw the man's face, I recognized him. It was Jack's older brother, Jace Redding, a married man no less. Jace was surprised when I called him. I gave him the address where I was staying and told him it was urgent. When he arrived, I handed him a key to my house and said, "You've got to see this with your own eyes." I explained what I'd discovered. The person filming Jack and Marcy's rendezvous was none other than Jace himself. Right now, they were holed up in a bedroom on the 3rd floor. John and I watched through the window as Jace approached my front door, slipped the key into the lock, and stepped inside. "What do you think he'll do when he finds out who it is?" John asked quietly. "Depends," I said. "Jace is a proud man. Pride makes people unpredictable." "I just hope he doesn't do something he can't take back," John muttered. Moments later, while we sat tense in the kitchen, a shot rang out from inside the house. Our stomachs sank. We feared the worst. John immediately dialed 911. Soon, flashing lights filled the street as police cars, an ambulance, and a fire truck arrived. We stood outside watching everything unfold. To our disbelief, Marcy and Jack, half-dressed and handcuffed, were led out by officers. The absurdity of it all hit us, and we couldn't help but laugh. But the laughter faded when we saw Jace being wheeled out on a stretcher, blood soaking through his shoulder. John grabbed his police scanner and set it up. Through the chatter, we learned what happened. Jace had stormed the 3rd-floor bedroom, and Jason, thinking it was a break-in, shot him. Jace survived, but would need surgery. Marcy emerged later, fully clothed now. Across the street, our eyes met, her face drained of color. The situation had gone from bad to catastrophic for her. John shook his head and whispered, "Can you believe she was tangled up with both brothers?" "There's a 3rd brother, too," I admitted. "I just don't know who he is yet." "I feel bad for Jace," John said quietly. "Yeah," I replied. "Nobody deserves this mess." By 6 Wednesday morning, I pulled up at my relative's place. Klaus Rubenstein was already awake, coffee in hand. He opened the door before I even stepped out of the car. While the house was still quiet, I sat with him at the kitchen table and told him everything that had gone down the night before. His wife, Rose, was shocked to see me, but wrapped me in a hug the moment I walked in. Not long after, my daughters came downstairs, already dressed for school. They ran into my arms, ecstatic to see me. I drove them myself, savoring every second, before returning to the in-laws' house. Klaus left for work, and Rose and I spent the morning talking. We came to the hard conclusion that Marcy had never truly loved me. Later, I paid a visit to Jace Redding, who was recovering nearby with his wife. When she was introduced to me, she jumped up, visibly anxious, until I embraced her and told her she wasn't to blame for her children's recklessness. Jace chuckled at that. "Heath's always been sensitive," he said, "but I've never once seen him lose his temper." "I came close a few times," I admitted. "Felt like if I ever did, I might kill someone." Jace laughed. Jason was now behind bars. Jack, ruined by scandal, was headed for bankruptcy. No one knew what Jason's wife planned to do next. Then Jace turned to me and asked, "You want your old job back? Manager's spot is open?" I shook my head. I couldn't explain it, but my whole outlook on life had changed. At the transportation center, I watched Jack clock in and out for the final time. Jace told me he'd be there within the hour. When Jack drove away, anger radiating from him, I couldn't help but find it darkly amusing. Knowing his temper, I called John Sexsmith and asked him to keep an eye on my house, just in case trouble followed. Meanwhile, across town, Maureen was locking up her office for the night when her secretary walked in. "There's a good-looking man here," she said with a grin. "He's got a dozen red roses and wants to know if you'll have dinner with him." Curious and cautious, Maureen stepped out to see who it was. The moment she saw me, whatever doubts I'd had about her feelings vanished. Tears welled in her eyes. That was all I needed to know. She drove us to her apartment, parked, and we headed to Outback Steakhouse for dinner. Steak, shrimp, and their famous blooming onion. A couple of cocktails loosened the tension that had been hanging between us. Just as we finished eating, my phone rang. It was John. Jack had beaten Marcy home and was waiting for her inside. The liquor he'd been drinking all night had only sharpened his rage. His father lay in a hospital bed, his brother was behind bars, and he himself had just been let go from work. In his mind, everything traced back to Marcy. She was the reason it had all fallen apart. When she finally stepped through the door, he was already waiting, clutching a gun. The sound of shots shattered the quiet. A neighbor, terrified, kept dialing the police over and over. Marcy survived the initial moments but was in critical shape. They rushed her to the emergency room without delay. John said her chances didn't look good. I passed this on to Maureen, who immediately called her parents. We all met at the hospital, clinging to fragments of hope. 6 hours later, the surgeon delivered the news none of us wanted to hear. She hadn't made it through the operation. Too much bleeding inside, nothing more could be done. I phoned Bill and his wife to explain what had happened and told them I'd return his car and collect my truck on Friday. Breaking the news to the twins about their mother's death was the hardest thing I've ever done. Klaus and I chose to have the casket sealed when we selected it. I couldn't stop thinking about how one man's reckless actions had destroyed so many lives. People rarely consider how far the ripples of their choices can reach. As we walked back from the gravesite, Klaus pulled me aside. "Heath," he said quietly, "there's no blood connection between Jace Redding and the kids. But more importantly, how long has Maureen been in love with you?" "According to Marcy," I answered, "since the summer she and I got married." Klaus nodded. "Did she mention that her sister left me over 35 years ago? I've been grateful ever since. If you and Maureen find happiness together, you have my blessing." That was the moment I realized my life could begin again. 5 years passed. I watched Linda and Lauren waiting for the school bus, laughing together. Maureen, now my wife, busied herself tending to our 2 preschoolers. Bill and Betty had become proud grandparents. The old gas station and general store had transformed into the beating heart of our little village. We even had our own post office now. When the weather was warm, I walked to work along the path by the pond beside the house we built. Jace Redding and his wife stopped in often. His eldest son's ex-wife had moved nearby with her children. Jack was sentenced to 10 to 25 years for involuntary manslaughter. Jason, on the other hand, managed to have his charge reduced to a misdemeanor. And as for what we call this corner of the world, the name came about after Bill hammered up a hand-painted sign at the crossroads. It read, "We are all here because of circumstances," and somehow that said everything.